Let's just move on. All right, well, don't you ever just want to go like that after you get a chance to worship the Lord? So here we are. Join us in the book of Judges. We're going to pick up where we left off because that's what we do. So we're in the book of Judges, and tonight we're going to be picking up in chapter 13 of Judges. We've really come through almost all of the discussion of what you call the major judges in this book. We're coming today to the last one, which is the life of Samson. And so continually through this whole book, we've seen that the whole theme of this entire time period, again, to set up the time period, remember, this is what the Lord wanted for Israel, for a government, for a structure, for a daily life. This is what he actually wanted. You know, I think often when we think of Israel, we think of, king this or king that or King David or another king. No. This is what he wanted. He wanted a people that were in his promised land looking to him. And so the idea of not having a king, not having a big centralized government, but having a people that look to him, that was always his plan. That's really what he wanted. And so he has to raise up a judge because we've found that in the times of our most freedom is when we have our most trouble with it. And we fall into the most sin. And of course, the theme of the book is that every man did that which is right in their own eyes. Sorry, ladies, every woman did that which was right in their own eyes as well, okay? So the cycle of sin and then them crying out eventually to the Lord for a judge. And we've looked at most of these major judges so far. We looked through the first 5, Ehud, and all of them really showed us a pattern of what we can do to be living for the Lord. You know, as we look at the present age, evil age that we live in, how can we face that? Well, Ehud really gave us a lesson on living for God in the face of evil. Deborah and Barak, courage, right? The whole story was about stirring people up. Let's get moving, right? And then the story of Gideon, you know, building faith through experience. That you don't start as this amazing conqueror for God, right? You build that through experiences with the Lord in building your faith. And then we looked at Jephthah. And Jephthah was really kind of what I call the heart of this book of Judges. That was the focal point. Jephthah's story is the story of Jesus Christ, our Savior. And so we compared his story to how he's the prototype of Christ the last time we were together. So you'll get the 8-track tape on that online. You can look that up. But today we're in the story of Samson. And so chapter 13 through 16 is the story of Samson. And Samson's very, very different from this because all of these were stories of what a Christian should be thinking about and doing while we're living amongst all of the evil that we live in. But Samson's story is very different. It's a story of the spirit and the flesh. And so tonight, that's what we're going to be looking at. It's almost like, okay, well, now that you're a Christian, what do we do with it? You have the Spirit of God. How do you live your life? Well, Samson is a negative example of how to do that. Samson is one who has the Spirit of God. It's a reality of a carnal Christian today. Because Samson is a picture of a believer, somebody that knows the Lord, and yet they never choose to walk away from the flesh. And that's a reality even in the church today. Carnal Christians, we sometimes call them. They're just constantly heaping trouble upon themselves because of the sin and the flesh that they won't let go of. And Samson is a good example of that here in the Old Testament. Now remember, Samson is in the Hebrews chapter 11 Hall of Faith. He's mentioned there as one that had faith and walked with God. And so I expect to see him later in my life, in my next life. I expect to see him. But he's someone that never conquered the flesh. And so tonight, we can really use his story to look at different stages of progression as a person that has knowledge and understanding of the Lord, even acceptance of the Lord, and the challenge that living for yourself brings. There's no better, who better in the scripture to look at for a story like that than Samson? And that's what we're going to see tonight. So we're going to pick up in chapter 13 and see how far we can get with this. Lord willing, we'll get through it. You'll see. It's not going to be crazy. So as chapter 13 opens up, I really believe chapter 13, it's his background, okay? Samson's just going to be born in this chapter. It's the annunciation of his birth, this chapter 13. So it's really about his parents in all of this chapter 13. And so it's designed to show us, as we begin the story of Samson, that he has a godly background. He has a spiritual upbringing. The faith of his mom and dad are displayed in this chapter, okay? So this is where the story of Samson begins. Now, I point that out because that's not how the book of Judges has gone so far, right? So far in the book of Judges, we've read, there was an oppression from a foreign nation, and they finally cried out to God. Well, I've always found that interesting through the book of Judges, how it took them 8 years or 10 years or 12 years, and then finally they said, okay, I guess we have to go back to Jehovah. We couldn't fix this ourselves. And so that's been the cycle. They'll cry out and God will say, okay, I've got your man. He might be down in the wine vat and not know he's a mighty man of valor yet, but I've got your man, here we go. This is different. With the story of Samson, with this time period, even look at chapter 13, verse 1. It starts by saying, the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. So the Philistines along the Mediterranean coast are oppressing them, and so again we see this cycle of sin that's back. But something's different is going to happen. God's man's not ready to go, so to say. It's different. He's not going to say, okay, I'll deliver you. You, go deliver. No, it doesn't work that way. Watch this. Verse 2. There was a certain man of Zorah, the city of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, that means the tribe of Dan, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not, because that's what barren means. And verse 3, and the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said to her, behold now, you are barren, and you bear not, but you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore, beware, I pray thee, and don't drink any wine nor strong drink. Don't eat any unclean thing. And in verse 5, for lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, wow, so many things we could say about this birth, okay? Everything from the Lord being gracious to Manoah's wife. We never get her name in this story. We never get her name. I find that interesting because in many ways, she's even more godly than Manoah is. And I just find that interesting. So many things we could say. We could talk about sort of this birth in amazing circumstances. We could talk about how filled with the Spirit of God from the womb, the indication that certainly the clarity is there all through the scripture of the life begins at conception. And God has a plan for Samson, this baby in the womb. And even from this point, God's hand is on Samson, even in the womb. But what I want to point out, though, is just simply the Nazarite vow right now. Make sure you don't mix this up. Some mix this up and they think, oh, Nazarite. Well, isn't that town up in the north? No, that's Nazareth. Very different, two different words. The Nazarite vow, it just comes from the root word meaning holy or separate. Okay? And so there was a very specific Nazarite vow in the law of Moses. And it mentions right here in this section many of the things that were in the Nazarite vow. Right? No wine, no strong drink, no razor or cutting your hair. Later, we're going to get the idea here also of don't touch any dead thing. That'll come up as well. And so all of this is written down in Numbers chapter 6. We looked at that back when we were in the book of Numbers, going through that. But if you never thought about it this way before, think about this, that the rules of the Nazarite vow and what they really represent, they really represent, and what was the vow for? The vow was for a person to willfully say, I'm going to be dedicated to the Lord for a certain period of time. Well, here's a man that God is saying, I want you to be dedicated for your whole life. And I find it interesting what it represents here, because no wine, and we went through all of this back in Numbers chapter 6. I'm not really going to prove this all out right now, but no wine, it represents being separated from the world. No razor, being separated from the flesh. And no dead thing, don't touch any dead thing, represents being separate from the devil. And so the picture of the Nazarite vow is a picture of complete separation from all of our enemies, saying, I will not be tempted by these things and by the world. So you can go get more on that later. But this is the vow that God is asking for this baby in the womb, who will get the name Samson, to be under. He's got a plan. God has a plan here. Angel of the certainly, let's address this. It mentions it's the angel of the Lord. It certainly seems to be a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. We get that again. We've just recently talked about that back with, I think it was with the story of Gideon. We talked about that, and certainly we did when we were in the story of Abraham. So that's not our purpose tonight to dissect that. So here God already puts his hand on Manoah's wife, particularly on the baby. And he says to her that even she has to abide by the vow until the baby is born. Samson, it says in verse 5 that this baby would begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, this is also different from all the previous judges that we've seen, because what's different here is that the Philistines will not be conquered, will not be taken out, will not be subdued until really after the time of David. Later on, almost, that's going to be more than 100 years after this time. And so, different from previous judges, he's already declaring it's not going to come to a complete conquering of the Philistines, as all of these previous judges seem to indicate that those judges got through the challenge by God's grace. And already we have an indication that Samson won't truly fulfill the duty as all of the previous judges did. Again, we're going to see that he's going to be tied down by the flesh. So I do find that, have you noticed this now? Samson is not, God didn't say, oh, I have your middle-aged warrior over here. He's already prepared. Let me pull him out. No, God's got a plan, but it involves time. How many of you just love to wait for God's timing to come and fix the thing that you're dealing with, right? And yet God says, okay, I got a plan, but it may not look like exactly what you were thinking. God's not in a rush to fix this problem, but he has a plan to be gracious and deal with this. And he's picked a preborn to be the judge that will come and will deal with this issue. I really believe that, and we've talked about this other times as well, I really believe that to God, the journey is more important even than the destination. The way you get to God is even more important than being there. I mean, if it wasn't so, the moment we got saved, boom, he'd take us to heaven. There's something to be done. There's a journey here. There's a growing process, right? And we look at, I won't go down that train of thought, but think about that when we're so rushed for the destination, think about how, no, God's trying to enjoy the relationship in the journey. That's where relationship is found, not so much in the destination. Verse 6, let's just keep going for now, since we do have a good bit of ground to cover tonight. Verse 6, then the woman came, and she told her husband, saying, a man of God came unto me, and his countenance was like the countenance of an angel of God, very amazing. I mean, the word terrible doesn't really translate for us today, right? It was amazing, but I asked him not where he was, neither told he me his name. But he said unto me in verse 7, behold, you shall conceive and bear a son, and now drink no more wine, nor strong drink, neither eat any unclean thing, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death. Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, oh, my Lord, let the man of God, which you did send, come again unto us, and teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. Now, Manoah's wife knew that this was a heavenly visit, right? All indications is she didn't even have to ask. When she saw the angel, she immediately, whoa, this is from heaven, right? She didn't have to wonder. Here Manoah, though, he begins to pray, but what he prays for is very good, very interesting. Teach us. Give us more revelation, right? That's okay. That's okay. It doesn't necessarily describe the fact that he doesn't believe her, although we do get some indication later that he really didn't fully believe her. But his heart to say, I don't really know what she's talking about, but if this is true, teach us, show me, open up my eyes. Boy, that's a position where all of us should be in. And so this godly desire really from both of them is fascinating. I love that. Oh, by the way, this angel of the Lord, you know, when you see an angel or when you see the angel of the Lord, Jesus Christ, it's something awesome. You still see pillows with the little flying baby in a diaper, right? That is not the angels of the Scripture. When you see an angel in the Scripture, people usually fall down and get amazed, and the first thing out of their mouth has to be peace. It's okay, relax, it's all right. So this was an amazing thing that she saw. She didn't have to ask, are you from heaven? She immediately recognized, this is amazing. This is God talking to me. And now we pick it up here in verse 9, and we continue. God hearkened unto the voice of Manoah. And the angel of the Lord came again unto the woman as she sat in the field. Isn't that interesting? She comes back, reports to him. he prays, God, show us, teach us, reveal yourself. And he's wanting, God to reveal himself to him. And yet the angel of the Lord, or Jesus himself, comes back to her again. Continue in verse 9. The angel of the Lord came again unto the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. And the woman, in verse 10, made haste, and she ran, and she showed her husband, and she said unto him, Behold, the man has appeared unto me that came unto me the other day. And Manoah arose, and he went after his wife, and he came to the man, and said unto him, Are you the one that spoke to the woman? And he said, I am. Or I, yes. He could be in the modern military, right? I. So the angel of the Lord comes back and appears again to the woman. And Manoah has faith to believe his wife, and he prays, and the angel comes back. The angel of the Lord comes back. And God has something to say here. But it's interesting on what the message will be. He simply tells Manoah here again. Well, let me read just a few more. Let's do verse 12 through 14. Manoah said, Now let your words come to pass. How shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? And the angel of the Lord answered Manoah and said, Of all that I said to the woman, let her beware. She may not eat of anything that cometh of the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. He basically says, I already told her. I'll tell you again, but I did already say it. And so one of the things you can see out of this, though, is the absolute respect for women. This would have been unheard of in this culture, to be able to show that dignity to a woman. She's not property. She's just as capable as being equal in Christ, in service to God, as a man is. They have different roles, but equality. And just this, don't miss that, the dignity that this shows to her. And so Manoah kind of shows up with a little bit of that, hey, what do we do kind of thing. I'm the head of the household, which he is, absolutely. And she did well in going to her husband, hey, I need to get my one flesh involved in this, right? It's great, good stuff. But there's no new message. The message is, yep, I already told her that's what you're going to do. So he could have said something like, hey, you told my wife this is what we're going to do. This is exciting. Tell me more. But it was a little bit more like, what should we do? And so that's the way it came out. And I love that. I love that. The message is the same. This is the plan that God has for this child. But their urgency, their desire, don't you love that? Isn't that refreshing? If everybody that sits in your churches, that sits in your Christian circles, if everybody you knew heard something of the Lord, and they said, I don't really fully understand that. Can you tell me more? Or somebody, when somebody hears something of God, sometimes people hear something of the Lord and they go, oh, that's kind of interesting. I don't really get it, but yeah, interesting. Somebody else hears the same story that they don't fully understand, and they're like, oh, I don't get that. Where did you say that was in the scripture? Let's look it up, And I see that in Manoah and his wife. I see them, they're pushing in, right? Do you see that generally in people, that some people are generally always trying to push into God? Things come up and they're right there like, oh, tell me more. And other people, when things of the Lord come up, they're just like, okay, yeah, I'm right there with you. And you just get the impression that they're just backing off. They're not really pushing in. And you just see Manoah and his wife here as people that are wanting more. They're desiring to know. And that fills this whole chapter. And that's Samson's godly upbringing. He has two parents that are very interested to know more from the Lord. I love that. Love that. So Judges 13, let's pick up in verse 15 as we're looking at the story of Samson here in his birth. In verse 15, Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, I pray thee, let us detain thee until we shall have made ready a kid, that would be a young goat, for thee. And in verse 16, the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, though you detain me, in other words, I will stay for a little while, but I will not eat with your bread. And if you will offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord. For Manoah knew not that he was the angel of the Lord. And so, interesting here, I don't know that there's a great biblical reason for this, but the angel of the Lord here does eat bread with Abraham, did I write it down? With Abraham. We also see Jesus after his resurrection, he eats, right? But at other times, when the angel of the Lord shows up, like with Gideon and here with Manoah, he doesn't eat. So you can read into that how you think. But what's interesting, though, here is that Manoah thinks that this is just a man, maybe just a prophet of God. But it's actually Jesus Christ incarnate. He's not really quite there. He knows something amazing is happening from God. But maybe it's just a man. Maybe it's just some prophet that's come to talk to us. And now in verse 17, Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, what is your name? That when the things that you said come to pass, we may do you honor. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, why do you ask me about my name? Seeing it's better translated wonderful. Seeing it is amazing. It's awe-inspiring. It's secret in the King James maybe doesn't carry a modern definition of what it really entails. In fact, it's what it is it's Isaiah. It's Isaiah chapter 9. We're coming up on Christmas right now. For the how does that verse start? Do I have it? Isaiah chapter 9. For unto us a child is born. Yes, a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Prince of Peace, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. And that's the same word here, wonderful. It's awe-inspiring. It's amazing. Why are you asking me? Seeing it's otherworldly. It's beyond something that we need to talk about. And so now in verse 19, now Manoah is starting to get it. And so Manoah took a young goat with a meat offering, and he offered it upon a rock unto the Lord. And the angel did wondrously, and Manoah and his wife looked on. For it came to pass in verse 20, when the flame went up towards heaven from off the altar where they were doing the burnt offering and the meat offering, that the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of the altar. And then it sort of clicked for Manoah. And Manoah and his wife looked on, and they fell on their faces to the ground. In verse 21, the angel of the Lord did no more appear to Manoah and to his wife. Then Manoah knew that he was the angel of the Lord. So they're doing, in the process of worshiping God is when this is revealed that this is not just a prophet. This isn't just an earthly messenger with the Spirit of God, but this is the angel of the Lord that has come to visit them. And now the aftermath, now they're going to talk about the experience between themselves here in verse 22. Manoah said unto his wife, we shall surely die, because we have seen God. But, and that's a great word right there, but his wife said unto him, if the Lord were pleased to kill us, then he would not have received our burnt offering and our meat offering at our hands, neither would he have shown us all these things, nor would as at this time have told us such things as these. So his response is one of fear, of lack of faith. He really represents the unfaithful one. Looking at this situation, he's perplexed with his own fear. His trouble right now is he really is stuck in fear because of just seeing the miraculous thing of this angel of the Lord going up to heaven through the flame. And he's representing an unbeliever saying, we're going to die. When presented with things of the Lord, it's the unfaithful that would say, whoa, we can't do this. I can't be here. This isn't going to work. It's the faithful, like represented by Manoah's wife, that says, wait a second. We are on his side. We're servants of his. We're worshiping him. We're not going to die. You ever feel like that way? Sometimes serving the Lord, you feel like, oh, this is over my head. And you could start to feel like Manoah, like, I'm going to die. This isn't going to work. And then you have to remind yourself, no, wait a second. We're servants of the Lord. He's protecting us. We're worshiping him. He's our shield. He's our strength. And to have the faith of Manoah's wife, it's powerful stuff. And she says, wait a second. He's already told us that he has a plan for us. God has a plan for us. He's not going to allow you to go until it's your time. I was just listening to Nagme talk recently, and we're going to have Nagme Abedini Bahani come out in March. And one of the things that she was saying is she talked about being in Iran at the underground churches ministering. And she said, many times I had a gun put to my head. And she said, you just settle it after about the first time it happens, that you just realize that when it's your time, it's your time. When God's going to take you, God's going to take you. And you just, that's another level of faith, right? When God takes that fear away, like, I'm in the hands of God, whatever God wants to do. And I see that represented here in Manoah's wife. That, well, no, God said he's got a plan for us. So until it's our time, And how would that be to live your life for the next, 8 months, 9 months, thinking, I can't die because I'm going to have a baby first. That's kind of interesting, right? Interesting. But what great reverence and faith and dedication here. Manoah is a little nervous. And now in verse 24, the woman bare a son and called his name Samson, which means like sunlight. All right, interesting. And it says that the child grew and the Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between these two cities of Zorah and Ashtol. And so they name the child. He grows in the Spirit of the Lord. He is a child set apart to God. You think of John the Baptist and how he leaped in his mother's womb even, filled with the Spirit of God. And here's Samson, the same thing. God's already working in his life. How interesting is that? Now all this chapter, I really believe the one thing you don't want to miss out of this chapter. Back up for a second. Remember, we're in the book of Judges. We're looking at the deliverance cycle that God's mercy and grace continually comes and gets poured out. And we see the people, not men, the people that God raises up and uses constantly, right? That's the book. And now we have a chapter that's just two people told they're going to have a baby, kind of a miraculous way. And the one thing I don't want you to miss is this sets up the story of Samson. This chapter that's so different than all the other chapters of Judges is here to say, I did everything I could to give Samson everything I could. Don't miss that. That's what we want to say here. God is setting the stage. I have given Samson a background in truth. I have allowed him to be raised by solid Christian parents, right? To use the analogy. I've done everything I can for this child so that he knows me and he has my knowledge. That's the thing to not miss from this chapter. I want to compare him, this Samson, to somebody else in the scripture, because Jacob of old, you think of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, right? Raised in this family. This family that the promises of God came to Abraham. Do you remember as we went through Genesis, the promises that were given to Abraham, unlike any other time? The covenant of Noah, you think of that. You think of all of the other covenants that God ever made. Think of the covenant with Abraham. I'm going to give you a people through your lineage. I'm going to give them a land. And I'm ultimately going to do all this to bring the Messiah through you, Abraham. And that was passed down from Abraham to Isaac and then to Jacob. And so to be raised in this mode, to be raised in that environment, the promises of God are on you, young man, as you're being raised. Can you imagine? And Jacob was himself raised in a similar type of environment. To be told, there's a plan on your entire life from beginning to end. Jacob, like Samson, was raised in this spirit of truth. And yet, we're going to see that both of them had super similar flesh problems, right? You think of like every bratty church kid you've ever seen, right? They have the perfect parents. And you're looking at this kid like, why are you like this? Your parents are saints. Why are you like this, right? And that's the way you would look at a Jacob. That's the way you would look at a Samson. You would say, what's going on with you, boy? And yet, I want you to think about the stories of these two men as we go through, because they both had that kind of similar upbringing. Let's go to chapter 14. It brings us to our second point. And so I just kind of set up chapter 13 with the first stage of Samson's life, and the first stage in the carnal Christian life is the fact that there's knowledge there. There is knowledge there. There's a background of truth. There's a background of knowing who God is, knowing what is right. That's there. But now as we go into chapter 14, the second stage of a carnal Christian is the idea that they're drawn away by their own lusts. And that's really the heart of where we're going with this. And now in chapter 14, we're going to see Samson as an adult. If I have said the word Samuel instead of Samson all through this, I apologize. I may continue to say Samuel a couple times. I'm trying to say Samson, okay? So when you have a son named Samuel and you're trying to do a passage on Samson, it's going to happen sometimes. Okay, so chapter 14, let's continue to now look at Samson. Samson went down to the town of Timnath, and he saw a woman of Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. This whole chapter, 14, is going to show us Samson's marriage and divorce, really. He leaves it. He abandons her at the end. This is not Delilah that we're going to be talking about. If you already are thinking ahead of Samson and Delilah, this is not Delilah that he marries. This is a woman who remains unnamed that he marries and then abandons. And so with this background of Jewish culture, Jewish belief, the law of God, don't marry foreigners because they don't know God. They're going to draw your hearts away. With all of that background that Samson's raised with, he still goes to the Philistines and says, ooh, look at that girl. I want her to marry her. Now, Timnath, this town, is only 4 miles away from where he grew up along the Mediterranean in Zorah. So I'm sure just commuting around, he sees this Philistine girl and he wants to marry her. Verse 2, came to pass, he came up and he told his father and his mother, and he said, I've seen a woman of Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said to him, is there never a woman among the daughters of your brethren or among all my people? So he's saying, isn't there somebody of the tribe of Dan that you want to marry? Or at least among all of Israel? There's got to be somebody that you may go and take a wife. Why would you go and take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, get her for me. All I can think of is that girl in Willy Wonka. I want it now, right? For she pleases me. I want it now. Didn't she turn blue and float away, I think? He's not going to turn blue. Don't worry. Was that the one? No? Okay. Thank you. She went down the chute. So verse 4, but his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. So God has commanded to only marry within Israel, and there's just spite. Samson doesn't care about the plan of God, the will of God. He's clearly raised with wanting to do in his own mind, to want to do his own thing. And that's his desire. That's his own free will choice. His parents even push back, like, you're a grown man, but we're going to try to give you some advice. Bad plan. And he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to do it. And God allows Samson, it says, to go down this evil road. And I want you to think about it this way. God doesn't make someone sin, but we're going to see throughout the life of Samson that God knows how to use a sinner sinlessly. God orchestrates life together in such a way that he can even take sinful people and use us. Isn't that amazing? So when you think about that in Samson's life and you say, I can't believe God would use a sinner like Samson. He uses a sinner like me and you. We're just sinners in different ways, right? So I'm grateful that God can still work in the lives of sinners, because that gives me hope that he's got something for me that I can do for him. Oh, so God doesn't use Samson because he's sinful. God uses Samson in spite of his sin. But think, surely God would do greater things in Samson's life if he would just shed the sin, let it go, and live for God. You just got to imagine, what could Samson have done for God had he not been so encumbered by his own flesh, right? This James chapter 1 passage, it's really, I think, when you think of Samson, this might be a good one right here to think about. James chapter 1 is verse 14. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away of his own lusts. The devil made me do it. No, of your own lust, of my own lust, and enticed. Then when lust is conceived, it brings forth sin. And sin, when it is finished, it brings forth death. Do not err, my beloved brethren. Every good and perfect gift is from above and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variableness, neither shadow of turning. Did you notice it's putting two things against each other? When you sin because you're drawn away of your own lusts, but if you don't let that happen, then every good and perfect gift it's like God's shower is right here, but when I'm drawn away of my own lusts, it just leads to sin and death, and I'm no longer being showered by every good and perfect gift that comes down from God. Right? Of his own will, he begot us with the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creation. When I read that, I always think of Samson. How true is it? He was led away of his own lust his whole life. And now continue here, chapter 14, it's verse 5. And it says, "Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and they came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he ripped him as he would have ripped a young goat. And he had nothing in his hands, but he told not his father and mother what he had done." Not that he was necessarily hiding it, he just didn't tell them. There's no sin involved with dealing with this animal in self-defense. There's no sin here. Verse 7, "He went down and he talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time, he returned to take her." So they're dating, they're courting. "He returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And in verse 9, "He took thereof in his hand, and he went on eating, and he came to his father and his mother, and he gave it to them. And they did eat. But he didn't tell them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion." So, number one, before we get into the whole animal and the carcass and the honey and stuff, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Okay? It's one of the first indications that God is with him. God gave him the ability to get rid of this threat that could have killed him even. And so God's with him, and God helped him. God's got a plan for him. God's giving him mercy and chances, right? God's with him and killing of the animal. But this story of him killing the animal and the Spirit of the Lord coming upon him, it's here to set the stage for what we're about to read. So there's nothing super critical about him killing the lion other than the fact that he's going to use this story at his wedding coming up. Okay? But what we need to know is that when he dipped into the lion to get the honey, he broke the Nazirite vow, because he shouldn't be touching a dead carcass. And so again, just the disrespect that, this is what you need to see. He's looking at the lion that's been dead for a while, because he's been courting the girl, going back and forth, right? He's looking at the dead lion. Oh, look, bees got all involved there and created some honey for themselves. And as he's looking at this lion, this is what you need to think about. The godly person says, "I have a Nazirite vow. I can't touch that carcass." But the flesh says, "That's some tasty honey." It's as clear of a choice as you can get. And that's what this lion represents. It represents, am I going to live for the Spirit, or am I going to live for the flesh? And he doesn't even give a second thought. He just dives in and gets the honey and doesn't care. Just a complete, again, drawn away of his own lusts and enticed, right? You got to wonder, did he even pause? He just had the Spirit of the Lord come upon him, a couple days ago, a couple weeks ago, when he killed the lion? And so clearly he was in the Spirit at that moment, right? And now here he is, and he sees it later on, and he's like, did it even cross his mind, like, whoa, I have a Nazirite vow, I shouldn't touch that? Or did he just immediately go in the flesh and say, look at that honey, and go at it? We face the same thing, don't we? We face the same thing all the time. Everything we see in life, we're faced with a decision. Am I going to approach this spiritually, or am I going to approach this in the flesh? And I just wonder, how many opportunities do we not even see? How many people come through our lives that maybe we should think spiritually about? Lord, how can I interact with them, Lord? But instead, maybe we're just thinking, how can I use them? How can I gain an advantage somehow? How can I get my needs met through this person? It's so interesting, right? The difference between the spirit man and the flesh is pictured all through here. This is a violation of the Nazirite vow, and all just to fill his belly. Belly lust, I guess. Let's keep going. Verse 10 here. Verse 10. Now the story, it was here because he's going to use this at his wedding here now in verse 10. So in verse 10, so his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. They made a feast during their weddings. And in verse 11, it came to pass that when they saw him, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. It's a feast, it's a wedding, it's a joyous occasion, right? People are lighthearted and things are happening, lots of people. And Samson says, I'm going to put forth a riddle to you. If you can certainly declare it unto me within 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give unto you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. But if you can't declare it to me, then shall you give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. And they said unto him, do it, put forth your riddle, that we may hear it. And he said unto them, and here's the riddle, out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. Now, let me just break it down in case you missed the riddle, okay? We won't save it till the end. Let's just say it, okay? Out of the eater came forth meat. The eater is the lion, because the lion eats things, right? Out of the eater, the lion, came forth meat or food, is what it means. And then the second half of the riddle is out of the strong, because lions are strong, came forth sweetness, because of the honey, when the bees got in there and made honey. So that's the riddle, right? And to finish verse 14, and they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. Now, I don't know why you'd ever agree to say that you could figure out a riddle, because, I mean, my goodness, so many possibilities. But they were up to the challenge, and this is why we got the story earlier about Samson killing the lion. Number one, to show us his disrespect of the law of God. He was interested in himself. But number two, because he's going to use it here at his wedding. But it's all about Samson's cocky pride. You picture that. Okay, it's his wedding. It's his wedding. He's trying to boast in front of people and to his own gain. I mean, today maybe we would tell a riddle just to be like, I got one over on you. He's like, no, I'm going to get something out of this. I'm going to get stuff out of this. This is not just playing games, but this is serious cockiness leading to profit and gain and selfishness. It's not pretty. It may look fun at first. Maybe everybody's laughing and smiling at this point, right? First day of the wedding, oh, good riddle. Oh, that's a good one. Oh, everybody's laughing. They're not going to be laughing at the 7-day mark. I could tell you that. Because that's where sin takes you. That's where it always takes you. Verse 15. It came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, entreat thy husband that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have you called us here to take that which we have? Is it not so? And so they're mad going into day 7 of the feast. They're like, man, he's going to take our stuff because we agreed to this riddle. And these Philistines come and they press on Samson's new bride to say, you got to go get to Samson and force it out of him what this riddle is, or they're literally threatening her and her family to burn them down. This is no longer fun and games. If you weren't sure if this was fun and games or not, it's not. It's prideful. It's lustful. It's selfishness. It's ugly, and it's leading to contention, right? Now, verse 16. Verse 16. Samson's wife wept before him and said, You do but hate me. You don't love me. You have put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and you have not told it to me. And he said to her, Behold, I haven't even told my mother and father. How should I tell you? And she wept before him 7 days, all 7 days of the feast, while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told the riddle to the children of her people because she lay sore upon him. See, if you're a person of courage and conviction, you stand on what's right and you don't fold just because temptation comes. And as she continued to press on him, he folded. He folded. All she had to do was bat her eyes a few more times, and he folded. The emotion and the convincing of a woman prods a man often to forfeit many things. And it just, again, demonstrates he's not living a life of conviction. He's living a life of convenience, of whatever happens to make him happy in the moment. There was probably that one day that she finally came and she had another twinkle in her eye, and he just said, all right, I'll tell you. Just, do you see it? There's no conviction here in his life. There's not a standard of principle that he's living by. It's just whatever happens to work in any given day. Verse 18, and so now she told it to the Philistines, and now it's going to be trouble. Verse 18, the men of the city said unto him on the seventh day, before the sun went down, oh, here's the riddle. What is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? And they got it. They got it. And so he responded to them, and he said, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you had not found out my riddle. And even there, I mean, that's rude. I mean, we could put that into modern language, and then we'd have to plug the kids' ears. Okay, that's what he's being rude back to them. It's basically saying, you were involved with my wife in ways you shouldn't have been, and that's how you got this out of her. Verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and again, did you notice that right there? The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. All that he's been doing has been in the flesh. All of this is just cockiness and pride, right? But then here in verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, that's a Philistine city, and he slew 30 men of them and took their stuff, their spoil, and gave changes of garments unto them, which expounded the riddle, because he owed it to them, right? If you get my riddle, I owe you 30 sheets and 30 garments. So instead of him going to his house or to the store, he went down to a Philistine city and slaughtered a bunch of Philistines, got their stuff and gave it to him to pay off his debt. If you didn't think that this was serious before, now you get it, right? And so he took their spoil and gave change of garments unto them, which expounded the riddle, and his anger was kindled, and he went up into his father's house. That means he left Timnath and went back home to Zorah, 4 miles away. And in verse 20, Samson's wife was given to his companion, who he had used as his friend, or the best man at the wedding. So Samson's unnamed wife becomes the wife of his best man at the wedding. But we're going to find out in a minute, he didn't know that. Because remember, Samson left. He went to Ashkelon, destroyed a bunch of Philistines, took their stuff, paid his debt, and left and went home. He didn't even take his wife with him after the feast. And so we find out that she later gets married off to his best man. So his anger here comes up, but the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. And I'll say this, I think, later on as well. But remember, we've discussed this all the way through the book of Joshua and Judges. It is God's declared will that all of these Canaanites and Philistines in the land, judgment is upon them, and it is time, in accordance with God's will, to take them out. We've gone through that ad nauseum. This isn't. When they're taking out a Canaanite city or a Philistine city, it's not of their own will. It's God's will. It's clearly defined. So interesting that it does say the Spirit of the Lord came upon him to do that, to take out these certain Philistines in Ashkelon, excuse me. So that's why I believe we see the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Now, his motivation for doing it is all wrong. He's doing it to pay a debt. And on Sunday mornings, we've been in 1 Corinthians, and we're going to see that Samson in heaven will not get any reward for taking out these Philistines. He did it out of the wrong motivation. He did it to satisfy his own lust revenge. And it wasn't to please God. It wasn't as if, dear Lord, I know this is your will to rid the Canaanites in this land and the Philistines. No, it wasn't like that at all. And so although it was the right action, it was a completely selfish and wrong motivation. And it causes us to say, even if we're doing something correct today, are we doing it out of a sense of honor to God and honor for other people? Are we trying to honor Christ and win people, or is it just out of some selfish show? You know, you can have people standing up in front of you at places like a church, and they can still lose their reward when they get to heaven because maybe they did it for a show. Maybe they did it to draw people to them instead of to God. And so it's all about the motivation. And this is a great example of seeing that. A right action happened. Some Philistines got taken to judgment where God told them to be taken. And yet it was completely wrong in the way it happened. So think now again. I mean, you just go back, and I want to, again, just compare him to the story of Jacob, right? Jacob, just like Samson, raised in truth, raised in godliness, raised with a promise. And yet they both go so deep into their own lusts. Jacob stole the birthright, right? In Genesis 25. He stole the blessing in Genesis 27 from Esau. Everything about what Jacob was living for was to give it for me. I need it. I want more. And I want it now. Okay. All right, you get the point. But both of them had that same lifestyle of, I'm looking out for number one. I need it. I want it. And if somebody challenges him, man, you're going to see my anger and I'm going to come at you. And that's how both of them were living, just to fill their own lusts. Jacob was in the same boat as Samson. And I'm going to just continue to compare them as we go through. But for time, we've got to get moving. So let's get into chapter 15. Chapter 15 takes us to our third point, okay? After you're drawn away of your own lust, what does the carnal Christian do next? It turns into nothing but a life of conflict. And we've already begun to see that here in chapter 14. His own selfishness, his own lust that he's going after are causing problems with others. And that's our third point, is that the carnal Christian life ends up getting into the stage of just petty revenge. And you're always trying to justify yourself. No, I did it for the right reasons. I deserve to whatever. And it goes beyond just I'm lusting, and it goes on to the point of, oh, you don't like it? Oh, there's conflict with you? Well, let me tell you more. And just the conflict that ensues. And that's what chapter 15 is all about. His life in chapter 15 is going to seem so repetitive to you. And I think it's like that for a reason. I really believe that this whole short little chapter 15 is a repetitive chapter to make that point. It's going to make the point. How petty is this constant back and forth? It is. It's just constant back and forth. Constant conflict, and yet at every stage of this tit for tat, Samson's going to feel like, well, I was justified in doing what I did to them. And then they get him back. And gotta get puffed up again. Get him back. And it's just this constant petty revenge. Take a look at this. It's a short little chapter 15. Maybe we can blast through this kind of quick. Chapter 15, verse 1. But it came to pass within a while after, in the time of the wheat harvest. So we're in about June right now, of the time of the year. Samson visited his wife with a goat, and he said, I will go in to my wife, that's talking about adult relations, into the chamber, but her father would not allow him to go in. And in verse 2, her father said, I truly thought that you had utterly hated her, therefore I gave her to your best man. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. So the wife's father assumed that Samson abandoned her, and she remarried. She moved on. And so this father is trying to appease Samson, like, whoa, calm down, we can fix this. There's another sister here, So it sounds just like Jacob, right? In the story of Jacob. And so Samson's mad. He didn't even know. Can you picture that, right? Samson abandoned her, went home, got mad at the Philistines, took care of the debt, left. He comes back after a period of time and thinks he's just going to have a natural relationship with her as husband and wife, and to find out, no, we've moved on. And he's mad. I mean, think of the pride that goes into that mindset of, well, when I go back, she'd better be there, right? That is nothing but the flesh. He did nothing to cultivate this relationship with her and yet expects her to be right there. That's not the way it works. That's just the flesh talking. She should be cooking my supper or whatever, right? That's the idea that he's got in his head. I expect her to be whatever. Where's the cultivating of the relationship? Where's the love poured in? It's not there. It's pride, it's selfishness, is all we have. And so, and what is he going for, by the way? Oh, he brought a kid. Oh, it's so nice that he brought a present, right? Maybe he brought a box of chocolates too. Could have been. But he's just going there to have lust, right? He's in lust with her. That's all he wants. Verse 3. Samson said concerning this, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went, in other words, he's mad, okay? And now in verse 4, Samson went and he caught 300 foxes, and he took firebrands, and he turned their tail upon tail, and he put a firebrand in the midst between the two, and when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines and burnt up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and the olives. And PETA freaked out. They didn't like it at all. This is flat out revenge and anger. It's June, by the way. It's hot. It's June. It's going to catch fire real fast. But this is nothing but revenge. And then you start thinking, well, they deserved it, or he deserved. No, everybody deserves everything. But this isn't the way somebody in the Spirit lives. This isn't the way somebody that's controlled by the holiness of God acts. Whether he was wronged or whether he seemed to have been wronged. It's just nothing but petty self-justification to answer his own hurt by burning down the Philistines' crops. Romans chapter 8, verse 7, talks about the mindset that goes into Samson doing this, right? The carnal mind is at war with God, for it's not subject to the law of God, neither indeed can be, so that when they that are in the flesh, then they that are in the flesh cannot please God. See, when you're in a carnal mind, a fleshly mind, you can't please God, and it also leads to conflict and war with others. When you're in the flesh, you're at war with everything that's good and right and honest. And you're going to have conflict by nature of living for the flesh and living for self. Again, in 1 Corinthians, we've just been through the first 4 chapters talking about unity and division. The unity of the church is because we all come together, not in our own mind, but it says in chapter 3, we have the mind of Christ. We come together in the mind of Christ, not in our own selfishness. And Samson is living in his own selfish mind. Verse 6. Then the Philistines said, who has done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law. Somebody quietly in the background said, I know. The son-in-law of the Timnite, because he has taken his wife and given her to his companion, his best man. And the Philistines came up and they burnt her and her father with fire. And now they get him right back, obviously as unbelievers, always functioning in the flesh. So now they get their petty self-revenge, selfishness and justice, which is really not justice but revenge. The answer for burning down the crops, they burned down Samson's wife, who was no longer his wife. She was given to another. And so what do you expect from an unbeliever? But the flesh in conflict, right? And selfishness. That's what you expect from them. But it continues. And it never stops for a carnal Christian, because in chapter 15, verse 7, Samson said unto them, though you have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. Isn't that interesting? I just told you to set up this chapter. This chapter is going to seem super redundant, right? This cycle is not going to stop. Let me just give away the chapter to you, okay? They're going to keep going, and he's going to keep going, okay? And he says here, after like stage 2 of this petty conflict, one more thing I'm going to do, and then I'll be avenged. The flesh always thinks, oh, I can get the one up just one more time, and then I'll be satisfied. It ain't going to happen. The flesh never satisfies. It doesn't work that way. Sorry, I got so distracted. Let me just read that verse again. That was verse 7. Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and then after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. So he killed a bunch of them and then left the town. Again, here he goes again. He answers the killing of his wife by killing many of them, raising the stakes even higher. It never gets smaller. It always gets bigger when you're trying to get revenge, right? Because that's the key here. The flesh isn't after justice. The flesh wants revenge. You know, when you look in the law of Moses, in the law of Moses, God says, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? And people look at that and they're like, oh, that's so mean. You know, that's really over the top. No, it's there to limit our fleshly desire for revenge. You punch me in the eye right now, I'm going to want to take your head off. I don't want your eye, I want your head. And the law, which is perfect justice, says perfect justice is eye for eye. And then John chapter 1, Jesus came and gave grace and truth. And trust me, you don't want justice, you want grace. We want grace, don't we? And so here's Samson's acting like, oh, just this one more thing and then we'll have justice. No, he's after revenge. He's after revenge. Verse 9. Then the Philistines went up and they pitched in Judah. Because remember, Samson left and he went to a town in Judah is where Samson's at. So in verse 9, the Philistines went up and they pitched in Judah and they spread themselves in Leah. And so they send their army basically up there after him. And in verse 10, the men of Judah said, why have you come up against us? And they answered, we're here to bind Samson. That's why we've come up, to do to him as he has done to us. Then 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock Etam and said to Samson, don't you know that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this that you have done unto us? And he said unto them, as they have done to me, so I have done to them. Have you ever heard of something as petty as that? I mean, I think every one of us that's a parent has heard that out of our child, right? Well, they did it to me, so I did it to them. That is as petty as it gets, right there. Now, Judah, coming to Samson, they're living in lack of faith. They're saying, Samson, don't you know there are rulers? We shouldn't rock the boat here. And they should have never lived in that much fear. They should have had faith that God was able to take them out, and they didn't. That's a whole other subject we've been dealing with all through Joshua and Judges. But then by the end of verse 11, we see him say that as they did to me, so I have done to them. His sin has led him to this conflict. It's revenge. It's hatred. That's all there's there. This isn't from the Spirit. I think back to Samson growing up. I think, oh, give me that woman to marry. Let's have a wedding. Oh, this wedding day is so fun. There's smiles. And you think of we always think of the flesh like that, right? Like, oh, it's a fun thing. And the road, it leads you down into this revenge and conflict and disgust. This is where it leads you. To constant conflict, one-upping, seeking revenge, anger, bitterness, broken relationships everywhere you turn. And that's where he's brought himself to at this point. Broken. Everything's broken. Verse 12. They said to him, we will come down to bind thee, that we may deliver you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. So Samson says to the men of Judah, okay, look, I'm going to let you come take me, but you have to promise that you won't turn sword against me, that you're only going to deliver me over to them. And so he gets the men of Judah, his countrymen, to agree to that. And in verse 13, they spoke unto him saying, no, but we're just going to bind you fast and deliver you into their hand. But surely we will not kill you. And they bound him with 2 new cords, and they brought him up from the rock. And when he had come unto Leah, the Philistines shouted against him, and there it is, the Spirit of the Lord again came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his arms became as flax, that were burnt with fire, and his bands were loosed from off his hands. And he found a new jawbone of a donkey, and he put forth his hand and took it, and he slew 1,000 of them. And Samson said in verse 16, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jaw of an ass have I slain 1,000 men. And it came to pass that when, as he had made an end of speaking, that he cast away the jawbone out of his hand, and he called that place Ramoth Leah. And so he kind of unwittingly used the men of Judah to lead him down, acting like he was vulnerable, and he slaughtered the Philistines. We don't even know what happened to the men of Judah. They probably just left. And so, again, the slaughter of the Philistines happened in the Spirit, by the Spirit of the Lord. It was God's will to have them taken to judgment. But again, the motivation for how he did this was from the flesh and from revenge. Motivation is everything when it comes to reward. Just look up 1 Corinthians chapter 3, chapter 4. Motivation of what we do is everything. So be careful. It's not just about serving the Lord. It's about living for the Lord. It's about honoring God, right? Yeah, verse 18. Now, this is an interesting transition. We have hit the pit of Samson's life, okay? This is the pit. Verse 18 transitions in a very interesting way. It says, he was sore athirst, and he called upon the Lord. That's a great thing to do when you're in a heap of trouble. And he said, you have given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant, and now shall I die in thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised, meaning the Philistines will come get me. But God clave a hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came forth water thereof. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, or his life, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name thereof, and that place, yes, you'll never see it again, which is in Leah unto this day. It's just better than butchering it. And in verse 20, he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines for 20 years. This is a real God moment. Okay? Some people talk about God moments like God showed up, God used me today, and that's a God moment. This is a real God moment that never got experienced. These are the moments where God comes and says, listen, you've been living your life for yourself. Look how vulnerable you really are. If my spirit hadn't come upon you, where would you be? You can't even get yourself across this land without dying of thirst. You're nothing by yourself. These are the moments. I'm telling you, this is the moment in his life. This is what his life pivots on right here because of what comes next and because of his choice. This is the greatest opportunity to evaluate his life and say, what am I doing? Where am I going? And change directions in repentance. This is God's grace to bring a person that's been living in the flesh, to bring them low and to say, you need to think about this. You need to think about what you've been doing and give them a chance to reevaluate. When you see him here almost dead, starving of thirst, okay, do you see trouble? Or do you see God's grace saying, I'm trying to get your attention. Where's a bell? I need a bell. I'm trying to get your attention. You're going down a dangerous path. Think about what's important. And he cries out to the Lord, and he knows he needs water. But if you had known who it was that was asking you for water, you'd have asked for me living water, right? You get my John chapter 4? He's asking for water, and he still doesn't realize that he needs so much more than water. He gets the water, moves on with his life, never looks back. When what he needed was repentance. What he needed was gratitude to God for what God's been given to him. God also brought our friend Jacob to a point like this, didn't he? Jacob living his whole life, stealing the birthright, stealing the blessing, running off to Laban because Esau's going to kill him. And even with Laban, Jacob lived his whole life over there to trick Laban Remember the petty revenge back and forth between Jacob and Laban, right? Same thing as we have here, living for self-justification and revenge, all through Genesis 28, 29, and 30, through the story of Jacob. Same story as Samson, same story. Petty revenge, back and forth, living for self. And then Jacob is going to go back home. He's burned all those bridges with Laban. He's trying to go back home. And on his way back home, he knows he's going to get met by Esau. He has to face Esau on his way back home. And he stops, and he has an encounter with God. Just like Samson has an encounter with God. And Samson thinks, I'm going to die. Jacob, too, burned all his bridges with Laban. He's going back home to face Esau, saying, I'm going to die. Same thing. And he talks to God. And I think I have it here. Now we'll get to it in a minute. About how Samson talks to God. And the question is, will Jacob use these opportunities to reevaluate their life? Samson doesn't. He gets his water and he moves on with life. Now, I think a lot of folks are used to doing chapter 16 relatively slow, looking at each of the attempts to bind Samson and him loosing. We're not going to do it in that fashion. We're going to do chapter 16 quite a bit quicker than that. Because again, we're trying to make the point of the whole life of Samson and the stages of the carnal Christian life. I am going to go through chapter 16 right now. It's probably going to be a ton faster than maybe you've done it in the past. And chapter 16 gives us our final point. It's this. It's that there is a choice to be made. There is a final choice to be made. Samson, Jacob, they both have a choice to be made. They've seen their sinful life choices, and they've seen the problems that it's created within themselves and beyond themselves. Will they give in to God? God's trying to get both of their attention. Will they give in to God and repent, or will they continue in a sinful promotion of self? And as chapter 16 opens up, just after Samson's experience of thinking he's going to die, we're going to get an indication on where his heart is. And I want you to think about the opening of 16 that way. He's just faced the pit. And then chapter 16, verse 1 through 3 happens. Okay? So with that context, let's read the first three verses. In chapter 16, verse 1, then went Samson up to Gaza, that's a Philistine city, and saw there a harlot, and went in unto her. That means adult relations. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come here, and they compassed him in, and they laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all that night, saying in the morning, then when it is day, we will kill him. In verse 3, Samson lay until midnight and arose at midnight, and he took the doors of the gate of the city and the two posts, and he went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the hill that is before Hebron. That's a city of Judah in Israel, Hebron, a very popular, famous city. But taking the bars and gates of the door of the city, that represents the seat of authority of the city. That's where the leaders would come together and make decisions. So he takes the whole thing and leaves and takes it. Like, you guys have no authority over me. And that shows the strength that God has truly given to him. And so we know that. We know God's gifting of him. But what I don't want you to miss is he's just had this pit experience. And what does he do? He wants to get together with a Philistine woman. He has learned nothing. He's still a man who seeks the flesh. He's made his choice to continually live in lustful sin. He is still there. He is a man unchanged. God said in chapter 15, verse 18, I want to get your attention. It's time. And he ignored it. He ignored it, and he continues to live in the flesh. That is the travesty of this book. We think of what we're going to see coming up about how the Spirit of the Lord left him, he didn't even know it. I tell you, the travesty of the story of Samson is what we just read. That God gave him that great opportunity. Thanks for the water, God. Now, where can I find me a woman? Right? That's the travesty of the story of Samson. 16 verse 4. It came to pass afterwards that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. And now we finally get the famous story. In verse 5, the lords of the Philistines came unto her and said to her, entice him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we might prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee every one of us 11,000 pieces of silver. That's money right there. In verse 6, Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, where your great strength lies, and wherein you might be bound to afflict you. And Samson said to her, well, if you bind me with 7 green bowstrings, is probably a good interpretation. It's probably catgut, that kind of thing, that were never dried, then shall I be weak, and I'll be just like anyone else. So the Philistines plot to take him out, and they plot to do it through a woman, because they know him, and they know that he'll fall for it. And so Samson continues in the flesh. He lies, playing games, up to his old tricks. But notice that she's willing to have her boyfriend murdered for money. She's no prize either. I mean, the type of girl that he got with, right? I mean, that's worse. And so he lies and says that you can bind him with bowstrings, and it's not going to work. Verse 8 through 14, now they go through, this constant back and forth. I think you know this, how he says, okay, I lied to you, but, if you bind me with new ropes, then I'll be, And so she tells that to the Philistines. And they rush in on him, and he breaks out, and he's going to go after them again. And so he lied. And she comes back, and, you lied to me, come on, tell me the truth. And so then they go through from bowstrings to new ropes, and then he says, well, if you weave my hair, then I'll be weak. And he lied again. So 3 times he lies to her this way through verse 8 through 14. And yet something is happening inside of Samson, because he's not walking in the Lord. He's not following the Spirit of the Lord. He's lying. He's playing games. He's getting up and probably wiping out these Philistines. What's interesting through all of this section of this rising up and lying to her and then taking out Philistines all over again, what's interesting is he's defenseless and weak, and he doesn't even know it. He is so close to the edge of death because of his own sin, he doesn't even know it. He has no idea how close he is to giving up on the one thing that's truly protecting him, which is his relationship with God. He has no idea how close he is to giving that up. And that's what's so sad about this. He's been living in the flesh for so long, he can no longer identify what it means to live in the Spirit. And so just at the end of this section, verse 14, now, let me back up to 13, chapter 16, verse 13. Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto you have mocked me, and you told me lies. Tell me where you might be bound. And he said unto her, if you weave 7 locks on my head, and she fastened it to the pin in verse 14. And the Philistines came to Samson, and he awoke out of his sleep, and he went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. So all 3 of these ploys didn't work. And now let me say one more thing before we move on. I was going to move past it, but Psalm 73 gives a perfect picture of Samson at this moment, and he doesn't even realize how close he is to death. Psalm 73, for I was envious of the foolish, the psalm writer says. I was envious of these fools when I saw their prosperity. For there's no bands in their death, but their strength is firm. Surely you did set them in slippery places, though. The foolish, that is. You cast them down into destruction. How are they brought unto desolation? As in a moment, they're utterly consumed with terrors. The psalmist writes about how he used to be envious of all these foolish people, the unbelievers that were living for their own lusts and gaining all this stuff. And he finishes the psalm by saying, but surely you set them in slippery places, and they've been cast down to destruction. In a moment it happens, and they don't even know it's coming. And that's the state of Samson. And now in verse 15, she said to him, how can you say that you love me? Can't you just hear the tone in her voice, right? When your heart is not with me, you're mocking me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength is. And it came to pass, now here's the key in verse 16, it came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all of his heart and said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will be gone. And he tells her the truth. Finally. And did you know why? Verse 16, she pressed on him daily, and he finally breaks because of the seductive woman pressing on him daily. Proverbs chapter 7. Doesn't it remind you of Joseph of old? Joseph in Potiphar's house, right? And it says how she came to him and she lied with me day after day. And he left. He ran away. So when you think of Samson, don't stop there. There's positive examples for how to do it right. But he succumbed to this because he hadn't even the strength of God's Spirit left to get beyond this. He's rejected God. He's seared his conscience to the point where he doesn't even have the strength of spirit to get through these temptations at this point because of what he's done to himself. Right? Wow. He didn't even realize the place his sin was taking him was away from the Spirit of God. He told her the truth of his vow to God, and he didn't even realize what that would do to him. That's what sin does. It blinds you to the reality of where you're at in life. And sure enough, the Philistines come upon him, and they gave her money for telling the truth of what happened. In verse 19, she made Samson sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said to Samson, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." And he woke out of his sleep, and said, "I will go out as I have other times, and I will shake myself." But he didn't know that the Lord departed from him. That's the sad part. It happened when he was in the pit and he had his final chance to make that decision, and he rejected God. And now here, his own lust has given away every blessing he's ever had, and he didn't even know it. Didn't even know it. It took him away from God, and he didn't even realize that God was away from him. Ichabod, the glory is gone, right? Took him away from the very blessings for his life. It took him away from the very strength of his life. Took him away from the very purpose of his life. And he was so drunk with his own lust, he didn't even see it. Verse 21, the Philistines took him and they put out his eyes, and they brought him down to Gaza. And they bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Albeit the hair of his head began to grow back again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered themselves together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, "Our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand." And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, "Our God has delivered into our hands our enemy, the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us." And it came to pass, in verse 25, when their hearts were merry, that they said, "Call for Samson, that we may make sport of him." And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport. And they set him between the pillars. It means they made fun of him. They made him the butt of every joke. They probably physically abused him in front of the crowds. And then they just set him down after mocking him. See, sin has forced him to live a life of mockery. You think of the prodigal son, right? When the prodigal son left the house with the money from the father and he's smiling and the stuff's coming in till the money dried up. And then sin made a mockery of his life as he's sitting in the pit with the pigs. And here is Samson sitting in the pit where sin will naturally bring you. And there will be a period of your life where sin will finally be seen as it is with Samson. And we'll finish it up right here, verse 26. Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, "Allow me that I may feel the pillars where the house stands, that I may lean upon them." Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 people that beheld while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may at once avenge the Philistines for my 2 eyes." Not for you, God, for my 2 eyes, selfishness. And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, on which it was borne up, and the one on his right hand, the other on his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were inside. So that the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the burying place of Manoah his father. And he was judging Israel for 20 years. So Samson here asked the Lord for strength one last time to take out the Philistines, knowing that it would cost him his own life. And I think the best thing you can say about the death of Samson is that is the best you can hope for after a life of complete selfishness, is to go out in a blaze of glory. Again, how much more could he have accomplished had he lived in denial of the flesh and let the Spirit of the Lord control every moment? He would have said, "Whoa, don't go to the harlot's house, go over here. Speak to this guy, get him saved," right? Well, don't marry that girl, marry this girl and have the blessing of godly children, right? How many more things could have happened? So we've seen the obvious stages of progression of a person who knows the Lord but chooses to live sinfully, right? We've seen they have a background in the truth, they have an understanding, right? And be sure that children of Christians understand that they have a choice to make. God has no grandkids, right? There's no stepkids, cousins. God only has children. Every child needs to understand they need to personally choose to walk with God, live in his Spirit, be a person of faith, because without that it's impossible to please God. And then the carnal Christian, they get drawn away of their own lusts. It might start as fun and games, but it won't stay there for long. It's just nothing but pride and selfishness. And it leads to petty revenge, self-justification, nothing but conflict, right? And then finally, I believe there's always a choice. There's always a choice. The prodigal son, Samson, Jacob, there's always a choice that comes where you face the opportunity to get it right and get rid of all that junk. Let's just finish by going back and looking at our friend Jacob to finish this off, right? He stole the birthright. He stole the blessing. He lived for petty revenge with with Laban, back and forth. Then he went back home to face Esau, life and death, right? Heading back towards Esau. But this is what happens in Jacob's story. Samson was in the valley, no water. I'm going to die. I need the Lord. And never repented. Jacob was different. Chapter 32, it's verse 9. Jacob repents. This is what he says. When you read this, think to yourself, this should have been Samson. This needs to be me, right? Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord which sees me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee." That's what God said to him. And Jacob says, "I'm not worthy of the least of all thy mercies and of all thy truth, which you have showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I've become two bands. There's so many of me. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau. For I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. But Lord, you said," counting on God's promises, right? "Lord, you said, I will surely do thee good and make your children as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." You know what you see here? You see unworthiness, his unworthiness, God's worthiness, and you see relying on God's promises. I love that. That's repentance. God, I'm not worthy, but you are because of what you said, because of your truth. Man, that's repentance. And then even after this at Penuel, then he goes and he wrestles with the angel of God. And he's wrestling with God to gain the blessing from God. He's no longer trying to gain some earthly pot of soup, Well, that was Esau. He's not seeking the birthright, the blessing, something earthly anymore. Now he's seeking God's blessing. See, that is death of self-life. That is Jacob dying to self and being born again. In fact, to finish it off, the angel, after he wrestles with the angel, this is what's said. He said unto me, what is your name? And he said, my name is Jacob. And he said, your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince you have power with God and with men and has prevailed. Jacob is a new man. He has a new life. He has repented. The old is passed away and all things have become new. And he moves on. And now his name is now Israel. This should have been Samson. And this can be us. It is never too late to give up. We're super late tonight. I got to close. But it does no good to look at the life of Samson unless you realize that God's mercies are new every day and his grace is ready every day. And if there's business that needs to be done with God, do it. Do it. Before the day comes where the Spirit of the Lord leaves and you didn't even know it because you drifted so far into sin, right? Well, we're going to go quickly to prayer because we're late. So let's pray.